Hello and welcome to State Matters. I'm your host, Matt Muratore. Today, we will be discussing the economic recovery for our area and for the Commonwealth. I can't think of anyone better to discuss this with than the Executive Director of the Plymouth Regional Economic Development Foundation, Mr. Stephen Cole. Stephen, welcome to State Matters and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So, Stephen, you've been in this role almost 2 years now. But a lot of people don't know who you are. So would you mind just giving us a little bit about your background? Your background is very fascinating, actually. So go into it, how you got into this, where you've worked before, and some of the things you've done.
Sure, I'd be glad to. I haven't thought about it in a long time, but instantly my mind kind of goes back to when I was 12 years old watching this press conference that then Governor William Weld was giving. And he was talking about these reforms to welfare programs, and even at 12, I knew what that would mean to my family. But with all the hubris of a 12-year-old, I thought, if only he knew what I knew. And so from a very early age, I always knew that I wanted to help serve the public and the community, but to advance people, to bring quality of life, and to solve some of these entrenched problems that people in poverty sometimes have. I thought that I had to ascend to some kind of significant role like governor. I'm glad to say that after spending some 20 years almost in public service, I found economic development back when I was working in Springfield, Massachusetts, 2005 to, let's say, 2012. And one of the things we learned while we were there, we being the economic development team, was, cities and towns like Springfield and even Plymouth, you can have a balanced budget, but if you don't have something to look forward to for, say, the next 50 years, the next 2 generations, you're not really growing as a community. And what I learned was economic development is one of those really important tools that a local level jurisdiction or even the state has to help solve some deeply entrenched problems. And you can have some fun doing it. I've really enjoyed my time doing economic development.
So when you were in Springfield, was the casino idea on the horizon at that point?
When I was in Springfield, the casino idea had been on the horizon for probably 20 years, and it wasn't really clear which side was even going to win, and it came down to a contentious battle for that RFP to position Springfield as the place where that MGM investment was going to occur. But there was some significant problems in Springfield even at that time, and I think some of the idea was that the casino was going to help solve those problems by infusing cash, creating jobs, remediating blight, really changing the focus of a downtown so you could have that 24-hour kind of activity or 18-hour activity. I'm going to pivot a little bit and simply say that there are some communities like Plymouth that don't need those kinds of significant investments because we have such a robust downtown, and we already have that tourism industry here. So that gives Plymouth, unlike a place like, say, Springfield, an opportunity to really focus on the next 50 years rather than solving the problems from the last 50.
Yeah, that's a good point. Where'd you grow up, Stephen?
Well, the first 10 years of my life, I was born in Dorchester, so I'm OFD, Savin Hill, representing proud, and then when around 10 or 11, my family, we moved to Cape Cod. It was actually cheaper to live on Cape Cod back then than in Boston. So
my wife's family did the same thing. They went from Dorchester and moved to Falmouth, and that's where she grew up because of the same thing. Yeah.
And it was a wonderful place to grow up even then because of the sense of community. But my high school was 5 towns. There was 5 towns that made up the one high school, and we barely breached 1,000 students. Diversity was certainly lacking. That was a bit of a shock to me when I first moved to the area from Boston. But I have to say, with 85% of my colleagues, cohorts, and peers going off to secondary education, it absolutely informed for me what my next steps might be. So I know the importance of that kind of community and the value of how what your friends might be focused on and interested in might permeate and yield some pretty impressive results for oneself.
Yeah. Where'd you go to college?
Went to Westfield State. I initially wanted to join some kind of public safety administration, some kind of maybe FBI, but I remember brushing my teeth the first day of my freshman year, and I watched that second plane hit the second tower, and I knew the world was so much bigger than what I thought it was. So I pivoted to focusing on international relations and comparative foreign policy. The program studied mostly sub-Saharan Africa, and I think that's when I kind of got that bug for economic development by studying, areas that had not seen investment and how these sub-Saharan African countries were still able to meet the demands and the needs of their population. But without that type of investment, you're not able to get to that next level. Yeah. So I think early on that kind of focus on the world really did bring back to a local level for me how we can have an impact.
Yeah, yeah. So what did you do after Springfield?
So after Springfield, I just went down the road a little ways. At that time, I had just finished my master's degree at Trinity College in Hartford. A position became available in their economic development department.
Where was this again?
This was Hartford, Connecticut. So,
Connecticut,
yep, just 25 miles south of Springfield. People don't realize how close, close they are. But so I worked in Hartford for 5 years, Springfield for 7, and frankly, we worked on some really seismic, pivotal things. We were able to attract, when I was in Hartford, $1 million grant from the US EDA so that we could help support entrepreneurship. And we put all of that money into the community. And that I think is where I fell in love with working with entrepreneurs, and I got to see the real impact that they can have on advancing an economy. But after 5 years there, it was time for me, I think, to come back to Massachusetts. And frankly, working for mayors, when they lose their job, we lose ours. So I needed something more stable, and that's how I found myself in Plymouth.
And before Plymouth, were you in Carver too, right?
I was, yeah. For 2 years, I was in Carver. Yep.
What did you do in Carver?
I was town planner in Carver, but the nature of small towns as such, I was also, the water commissioner and the RDA director and 8 other things. And it was a great chance for me to really see how other departments interact with planning and economic development, because they're all permitting authorities themselves. So kind of facilitating that permitting process with my colleagues and the other departments, we were able to get some really impressive things done in Carver. Small town, but very innovative.
You mentioned the federal EDA. For folks at home, what is EDA?
Sure. So they are the Economic Development Administration. The EDA is nestled within the larger U.S. Commerce Department. So it has an awful lot of authority and money to be able to back up advancing economies in local jurisdictions.
Yeah, right. So you were hired by the Regional Economic it's a mouthful, the Plymouth Regional Economic Development Foundation. You were hired as the executive director back in 2019, correct?
That's right. Yeah, there's 13 board members, and it is a mouthful, Matt. So we shorthand it by simply saying the Plymouth Foundation. I invite you to do that too.
But I also think it's important for people to know that this is a foundation that is not just for Plymouth; it's for the area as well. First of all, a lot of people don't know there's an economic foundation in Plymouth, and it's been around for. And I know you're going to talk about the background of it for 20 years, but it's for the area as well. So so talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's true. We shorthand it so that we're the Plymouth Foundation, but the fact is, we never ever got away from that regional identity. In fact, Plymouth in a lot of ways arose by any other name and still arose. We're not a city by organization, but we are certainly the economic engine for our region. Our end of 44, we have a lot of the jobs, we have a lot of the commercial activity, we certainly have the tourism base. So when I took over at the foundation level, one of the things that we talked about early on was how do we add value to some of the things that are already happening. And so I have to say I'm so pleased to have the support from the 13 board members. It's an active board. A lot of them are small business owners, and they're all in the community. So they also understand Plymouth's significant role for the region. We're working closely with our friends in Carver. We've had some conversations with some friends up north, and I hope that as we go through the next couple of years, the Plymouth Regional Economic Development Foundation has that regional identity.
So the foundation, as I said, was founded about 20 years ago. What was the purpose or the mission of the foundation when it was founded? And if you could, can you name all 13 members?
I'll do my best. Starting with the executive committee, our president is Bill Hallisey, owner and operator of Shiretown Glass. Jay Kimball is our vice president. He is owner-operator of Wood Seafood down in the waterfront. We have our clerk, Charlie Wall, a retired college president from Massasoit. We have our treasurer, America's very own Kevin O'Reilly. We have our assistant treasurer, who is Bill Harris from WH Cornerstone. And now going into the at-large, we have our own Matt Muratore, one of our newest members. We also have Amy Naples, the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce. We have Melissa Origi, the town manager of Plymouth, as well as the town planner of Plymouth and the chairman of the select board. In fact, having those 3 members particularly on board gives us a lot of opportunity to work closely with the town so we can leverage what we have as our resources with the towns, but also we can match our goals. We don't work in competition with each other. In fact, we work very much collaboratively, and it's a very important relationship to have. I'm glad to have it. And I'm frankly, Matt, I think I may have gotten off a little topic, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some folks.
So you got
let's see,
Ed Santos, who actually
Ed Santos.
3 more members. Jack Meal.
Jack Meal.
Yep. And who else?
I'm
Mr.
embarrassed
Wallace's
to say.
daughter.
Oh, Dee
Dee,
Spencer.
yeah,
Yes, of
yeah,
course.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
This-
yeah.
No disrespect to those members. It's
No,
just a lot
absolutely
to
not.
remember.
Well, Ed actually is the one that pretty much started this, right? Ed Santos?
Ed Santos is also the one who's responsible for the industrial park. I know you're filming up at PAC TV, and Ed Santos is responsible for bringing 400 acres of developable space to Plymouth. So yeah, I'm glad to have him on my board. I refer to him endearingly as the Dean of Development.
He really is. And the reason I wanted you to mention those folks is because it's an impressive board and has a great deal of experience in so many different areas. And the reason this was developed 20 years ago is so it wasn't part of government, because sometimes government is slow, it gets bogged down, and so the funding. So talk about the funding, where the funding comes from, because it's kind of interesting how it's set up.
Sure. So we have a MOU, what's called as a Memorandum of Understanding, a contract of sorts with the town of Plymouth. They do provide some services or some funding to us, as well as some staff services, and that helps us achieve some barometric goals for the town that they set. For example, we are private nonprofit. You're right, we do exist outside of government, but we are the facilitators of the town's TIF program. That's a tax increment financing. It's an incentive that we use sometimes to entice development that might not otherwise come here. And it locks in the increase in taxes for a certain period of time. So we facilitate that program for the town, and for providing those types of services, we get paid for that. The town still retains the ultimate authority with the decision making. So just because we start the TIF application, ultimately things like that belong at town meeting for the final decision. So we work closely with the town. The other thing we do sometimes is take land of what's called low value, or sometimes land that has been off the tax rolls for some period of time. And what we do is apply for grants, get them shovel ready basically so that they're able to be developed, and then we get them back on the tax roll by doing a traditional market rate commercial sale. So we've had one success in the past. It was prior to my arrival off of Hedges Pond, and we restored, I believe it was 25 acres at that point to the tax rolls. We're working right now to restore 42 acres to the tax rolls on another project. And I'm glad to say we have a great partnership with Mass Development, another state semi-quasi-government agency that provided us $60,000 in site readiness funds so that we can take this very difficult site next to a capped landfill.
Where is this, Stephen?
This is on Hedges Pond, right near the Herring Pond intersection. And my sense is that this one particular project with the $60,000 cash infusion from Mass Development is going to yield potentially multi-million-dollar economic impact, including a realignment of a very dangerous intersection down there.
So there's also another project you're working on too, the old school building on South Meadow Road. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'll be glad to. That's one of the sites that we're considering for what we're calling the Plymouth Regional Entrepreneurial Center. And what that is intended to do is provide space for technical skill capacity building. So hackerspace, makerspace, tinkerspace, 3D printing. They're nuanced, but they are separate skill sets that do sometimes yield different types of products. But we want to make that space and those resources available to students, residents of the Plymouth region, so that they have a place that they can tinker, bring a proof of concept, so to speak, or prototype an idea. We intend also, Matt, to expand that program because there's a lot of food science that happens in our area. And so with the success of the Commonwealth kitchen at the seaport, we hope to have something akin to that down here in Plymouth, so that those folks who are making honeys, jellies, jams, beer, cheese, etc., they'll have a place to go and hopefully scale up their food business. So the place that we're thinking of doing that is right now at the underutilized former Central School Department for the Carver Plymouth School District, and that's at 253 South Meadow Road, right across from the airport, right next to the golf course, a couple of great restaurants nearby. We think it's a place where we can see some great activity.
Yeah. So talk about a little bit about, and we've talked about this at board meetings, you know, Plymouth is known as tourism. That's our number one industry. But the foundation is looking to go in a little different direction, utilizing tourism to draw other industries. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, glad to. In fact, tourism it's a place where activity already occurs. I mean, it's difficult to get to development if you don't already have the activity. In all the other places I've ever lived and worked, we were striving to build our tourism base. In fact, Springfield has, of course, the International Basketball Hall of Fame. There should be no better draw than that. But one of the consequences and setbacks of not having, future thought is they put it at the waterfront when it was cleaved from the rest of the city by the highway. So it's very difficult to get to. So just because you have it, just because you build it, doesn't necessarily mean that they will come. So I think one of the things that we're trying to do here is better understand how we can use tourism to not only increase our brand recognition, but also invite certain businessmen to come visit Plymouth on their vacations. Serious decision makers and venture capitalists take vacations too. And so what we want to do is kind of leverage our tourism profile with our entrepreneurial profile, so that if there's a young person or any person who's working on a great idea that maybe needs a little bit of seed money, or maybe they need a distributor chain, or really if there's any gap in what their success might be, someone on vacation could very well be the critical need that gets them past that next step. And what's more, we obviously offer a great time, so they should come here anyway.
Yeah, and you often talk about government really changing how they focus on Plymouth, and not just tourism, but looking at it as it's creating industry, it's creating jobs. How do you go about changing that image, in your estimation?
That's an excellent question, Matt, and it is difficult.
And I hope you have an answer for it.
Of course I do, right here. But the fact of the matter is, I have strived to change the perception from our state partners. I mean, on a local level, a lot of people don't realize, but cities and towns are political subdivisions of the state. We have charters to operate, but really within parameters and rules that the state sets up. That said, we're reliant on the state for a lot of things, and not least of all, part of the town's budget. So when it comes to decision making or an infusion of cash, I really need the state partners to understand that we're more than seasonal traffic and cranberry bogs. There's a great deal more happening here. And one of the things I do like to point out is when you look at every other place in Massachusetts that identifies as a city, that has a population greater than, say, 40,000, they're all post-industrial. They all have these industrial footprints and relics that makes it very difficult to develop in those places, because it's dirty, so to speak. Industry used to be dirty, and it's expensive to clean up. Plymouth isn't a post-industrial city. In fact, Plymouth is a post-nuclear city. And the pivot point for nuclear is things like quantum and AI. So in talking to the Navy, some of these nuclear technicians that are leaving the submarine classes, they're nuclear technicians, just like what we have in our backyard from that closed power plant. The pivot point for those folks is quantum research and development. And quantum computing is what I'm talking about. This isn't sci-fi, folks. This is real. We just don't have enough people in the field yet, and we don't have access to the right types of resources to make it as abundant or readily available as we need. But the feds are funding this, and they're actually encouraging these federal agencies to find small businesses that are focused on starting research and development within quantum and AI. So I'm glad to say that when it comes to what assets we have, and even with the decommissioned power plant, we're further ahead than many other communities because we have that talent pool here. And with our waterfront, I think we're also able to attract big funders like the Navy. So my sense is that the Maz that's coming in soon, we'll be very excited to have that AI Mayflower here, because it's one of the things that the foundation is focused on using to attract this type of industry here in Plymouth.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Now, how's that going to work with that ship out of Plymouth, UK?
So I understand that the ship is run through AI, artificial intelligence,
Right.
And when it comes into bay, it's really going to be a very modern representation of the original Mayflower.
Original Mayflower, yeah.
Although it's not manned, there's some really interesting quirks of history that have happened to this ship as it happened to the original Mayflower. But the importance of that Maz ship coming here is if the last 400 years matter at all, we have to look to the next 400 years. And I think this ship coming here really does position us to be able to attract those critical need industries like AI, like quantum, and frankly, like also developing our bay, because there's lots of industries that could happen within our waters that we haven't fully explored yet. And I think this could bring attention to the bay.
And that's coming the spring of 2022, I believe, right?
If everything goes well, that's what I understand.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So let's talk about a couple of the organizations you work. You work with a lot of organizations, but you really have developed a relationship with the Chamber and with Sea Plymouth. Can you talk about that a little bit more, and the importance of you as the Executive Director of the Economic Foundation working with these groups and other groups as well?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, it takes a village. There's nothing that the foundation can do by itself. I mean, we really do rely on our partners and our friends of the foundation to get done all of the things that we do. I mean, I kind of refer to it sometimes as Tom Sawyering, where we have this fence that we have to whitewash, right? But we don't have enough hands and we don't have enough time, so we kind of invite people in to whitewash our fence for us. Amy Naples at the Chamber also serves on the board, and we struck up a fast friendship. And I think it's partly because we understand the relationship that the Economic Development Foundation has toward creating small businesses that ultimately will become members of the Chamber of Commerce. So in a lot of ways, I see ourselves as a bit of a feeder agency so that the chamber membership grows as we have an increase in our small business profile. With regard to See Plymouth, I already touched a little bit on how we're using tourism to increase our profile, but Lee Filson has been phenomenal to work with, greeted us with open arms. We used to be neighbors, and now we're just kind of down the street from each other, so we still see each other regularly. In fact, we saw each other just a couple of weeks ago at the small business fair, and you know, I have to say she's always understood how important it is for us to develop other types of industries and focus on new types of development, say something like a convention center or a conference hall, so that we can kind of have a next level of tourism. Because the people who work in the tourism industry now are mostly in fields like retail or restaurant. But if we had higher levels of attractions like a convention center or a conference hall, operations managers, event schedulers, executive directors of, I mean, something like that can create so many more job opportunities for our residents.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up too. Recently, See Plymouth was awarded $150,000. That was an earmark put in the state budget to put together a group of people to talk about this convention center, conference center idea. And you're going to be part of this as well, is that correct?
It's probably one of the most exciting projects I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So first and foremost, we have to take into consideration, you know, that the nature of conferences is changed. You know, we're probably not going to see the very large-scale conferences come back for a little while. So looking at mid-sized conferences, there's really nothing south of Boston, north of Providence, or really east of really east of Worcester. But between Boston and Providence, there's nothing like what we're talking about here. 3,000 to 5,000, maybe 10,000 seats. A place where a conference from across the country or even across the globe can come, because let's face it, Plymouth already has an international profile. But when you consider that 4.9 million people live within just 40 miles of Plymouth, it sends a message, I hope, to our state partners as well as our regional partners that Plymouth really is, in a lot of ways, the center of a lot of activity, and more activity can still occur here if we have some kind of a brick and mortar and infrastructure presence, something like a convention center conference hall. And look, let's face it, you know, the Comic-Con folks spend money just a little bit differently than the businessmen. So if we were to have an AI conference or a quantum research and development conference, that also helps bring activity into an area and helps us achieve that 18-hour, 7-day-a-week profile that supports the tourism, the restaurant, and the retail.
And this money is to do a study. Probably going to hire a group to do a study and see, does it make sense to have one? What a game changer this will be if we can get a conference center, convention center in this area for economic development, as you mentioned earlier, for the type of jobs that it's going to create, right?
The types of jobs it creates. There's obviously a tax obligation that they'll have to pay. I mean, one of the things that people have to remember is governments sustain themselves through tax revenues. And one way that we reduce or diminish the burden on everybody is by having what they call new growth. So new investors coming into a community. And I have to say, it's really important for our partners and our viewers to understand that the foundation isn't just pro-development. We're also very much pro our values and our conservation culture. I grew up in this area, and I used to run cross country before I got too comfortable playing video games. And I think one of the things that I so cherished about this area relative to an urban environment is that I always had access to cranberry bogs or beautiful running trails that I could go on. And so we take that seriously, and we don't want that to go away. So when we talk about development and we talk about inviting these types of large-scale investments like a convention center or conference hall, we talk about doing so with a balance toward the ecosystem and sustainable economic development. We don't want to lose the character of our community. That's what makes us distinct. That's what makes us special. But there's more that we can do to help create a quality of life or enhance the quality of life of our residents. And that might be by creating new, diverse types of jobs that aren't within retail and aren't within the restaurants or construction.
Yeah, and I do think too, and tell me what you think about this, but there seems to be, because we are decommissioning community, as you brought up, there seems to be some federal dollars that are out there. I think in the combination with the American Rescue Act money, the ARPA money, for decommissioning, but also for economic development, that it seems to be a perfect storm coming together, financially at least, the way I see it, for an idea like this. Your thoughts on that?
It's true. I mean, the amount of money that's coming down the pike right now, not just from the state, but also from the federal agencies, I mean, it's obviously intended to help recovery happen, right? We were obviously set back with our Plymouth 400 celebration. Michelle Pecoraro and the P400 group did an amazing job planning this celebration that was going to bring international attention to us and perhaps even incite international investment from foreign VCs, VCs being venture capitalists. But because of that, the industry obviously has taken a little bit of a hit, and that's why I think things like the Convention Center and things like the Entrepreneurship Center are necessary, because it's the next level that's needed in order to get folks out of their homes. I mean, 4 million Americans quit their jobs in August, and 33% of Americans are reporting that they will leave their jobs at some point. What jobs will they go to? Probably the ones that were just vacated. So by having these types of things in Plymouth, we're positioning ourselves for the next 50 years. And I say 50 years because that power plant was in operation for 50 years. So I'm just taking apples to apples here, and I'm just saying, what can we make this place look like in the next 50 years? Well, the last 50 years, this town grew by 911 people on average per year. The downtown waterfront wasn't developed like it was, say, 50 years ago. And I'm just very proud to say that Plymouth as a community has really come into its own. The next 50 years will be very exciting for us because the things we do today are going to lay that foundation for what types of investments and activities our residents are going to look forward to then.
Recently, you talk about the future. Recently, you worked with the chamber and the school system on a children's business fair. Talk about the success of that and what that means to the community.
Well, for us, it's the long game, right? So if we're going to prepare our future business leaders, we have to start early. And I'm very glad to say that Scott Williams and Chris Campbell and all the principals at the elementary schools were amazing partners. I can't thank them enough. We floated this idea at the foundation a couple of years ago of hosting a children's business fair. The idea is to break down those barriers and kind of shatter that glass ceiling before they even realize there is one. I've met a lot of folks in my career who have great ideas. They actually even have products attached to them. They have a mindfulness toward how they can grow, but they don't see themselves as entrepreneurs because they never really thought of themselves that way. In hosting this business fair with the Plymouth Public Schools at West Elementary School a couple weeks ago, what we did was really, I hope, shatter that glass ceiling before they even know it's there. And I don't want to throw it back to you, Matt, and interview you, but I understand that even as a child, you yourself participated in a business fair.
Yeah,
right?
when we cut the ribbon there, I actually talked about that a little bit. I remember being a fifth grader and actually doing the similar thing, and this is years ago. And I came in second place. I made Rice Krispie treats. But the point of it is, though, that I had that idea. That's where I got the love of having a business someday, and I'm proud of a small business of a couple businesses now, and I think having that spark in a fifth grader to think that way and seeing some of those fifth graders that were there, the 140 plus fifth graders that were there and some of the ideas they had and the enthusiasm they had, this town's going to be in great shape for the future. So it was really great. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you for all you've been doing here in Plymouth. It's great to have you here, and I'm looking forward to absolutely the next 50 years of what's going to happen here in Plymouth. So. Again, thank you, Stephen, for joining us today. I really appreciate that. I want to thank all you for watching, and we hope you enjoyed today's show. Thanks again to all the staff here, Donna and all the staff here at PAC TV for another great show. We'll see you next time on State Matters.